The rain had not stopped since morning, when the funeral finally began at the small military cemetery outside Dallas. Gray clouds covered the sky, while rows of veterans stood silently beside the grave of Rex, a retired military K-9 who had served alongside combat units for nearly 11 years overseas. The old German Shepherd had died 2 days earlier, after collapsing during a veterans' charity event, and now dozens of former soldiers gathered to say goodbye to the dog many of them believed saved their lives more than once. Beside the casket stood retired Sergeant Daniel Brooks, Rex's handler and closest companion since Afghanistan. The old veteran looked broken in a way that made even hardened Marines avoid eye contact. His uniform jacket trembled slightly as the pastor finished the final prayer and cemetery workers slowly stepped toward the grave. Then suddenly Daniel raised one shaking hand and spoke words nobody there expected. "Please, don't bury him yet." The entire cemetery fell silent. Some people lowered their heads uncomfortably, while others assumed grief had simply overwhelmed the old soldier. Daniel walked slowly toward the casket, tears running openly down his face now. "He always woke up before me," he whispered weakly. "Every mission, every patrol, every single time." Several veterans nearby quietly wiped their eyes because they understood something civilians never fully do. Military dogs are not equipment to soldiers. They become brothers, family, pieces of survival itself. The cemetery workers hesitated awkwardly, while Daniel placed one trembling hand against Rex's fur for what he believed would be the final time. Then something impossible happened. The old German Shepherd's ear twitched. At first, nobody moved because no one trusted what they saw. One Marine thought the rain played tricks on his eyes. Another veteran actually stepped backward in shock. Then Rex suddenly inhaled sharply and lifted his head weakly inside the casket. Gasps exploded across the cemetery. One woman screamed. The pastor dropped his Bible into the wet grass. Daniel froze completely before falling to his knees beside the dog, unable to speak as the German Shepherd looked around weakly with confused, cloudy eyes. A veterinarian rushed forward immediately after realizing the truth. Rex had not died from heart failure, like everyone believed. Severe hypothermia during transport, combined with an abnormally slow pulse, caused responders to mistakenly declare the aging K-9 dead hours earlier. But Daniel barely heard any of the explanation. He simply held Rex against his chest in the rain while the old military dog rested his head against the veteran's shoulder, exactly the same way he used to after combat missions overseas. And beneath the storm-covered Texas sky, every veteran standing there silently witnessed something they would talk about for the rest of their lives. The moment loyalty refused to leave this world before saying goodbye properly. For the next 48 hours, the story spread across Texas faster than anyone inside that cemetery expected. News stations called it a miracle. Veterans groups across social media called it something else entirely: unfinished loyalty. Videos recorded during the funeral showed retired Sergeant Daniel Brooks collapsing beside Rex in the rain, while the old German Shepherd slowly lifted his head inside the casket. Millions of people watched the footage online, but none of them truly understood what happened after the cameras stopped recording. Because while the world celebrated the impossible survival of a military K-9 declared dead by mistake, Daniel sat alone beside a veterinary intensive care unit, terrified the dog might still slip away. Rex remained weak after the incident, extremely weak. The aging shepherd had severe cardiac complications, combined with hypothermia, that slowed his pulse so dramatically emergency responders failed to detect signs of life properly. According to veterinarians, the dog should never have survived the transport to the cemetery at all. But somehow he did. And every time doctors tried separating him from Daniel during treatment, Rex's condition worsened immediately. His heart rate dropped, stress levels spiked. Even sedatives barely calmed him unless the old veteran stayed nearby. "You two are connected in a way I can't medically explain," one veterinarian admitted quietly late that night. Daniel only nodded because he already knew. He'd known since Afghanistan. Nearly 12 years earlier, Daniel and Rex survived an ambush outside Kandahar after an IED destroyed part of their convoy during a nighttime patrol. Daniel suffered severe injuries and remained trapped beneath a burning vehicle while enemy fire pinned down the unit around them. According to military reports, Rex ignored evacuation commands repeatedly and stayed beside Daniel for almost 20 minutes until extraction teams reached them. Several Marines later admitted privately that Daniel would have bled to death in the desert if the dog abandoned him. After that mission, neither of them were ever really separate again. The third night after the funeral incident, Daniel sat beside Rex's hospital bed while rain tapped softly against the veterinary clinic windows. The old German shepherd slept peacefully beneath warm blankets, breathing slower now but stable. For the first time in years, Daniel finally allowed himself to relax slightly. Then his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Daniel almost ignored it until the caller spoke. "Sergeant Brooks." The man's voice sounded older, nervous. "My name is Dr. Harold Levin. I was one of the military physicians who reviewed Rex's medical file before retirement." Daniel frowned immediately. "What does that have to do with anything?" Silence filled the line briefly before the doctor answered carefully. "There's something about Rex's condition you were never told." Daniel's chest tightened instantly. 20 minutes later, the old veteran sat alone in the clinic hallway, listening to a truth buried for years beneath military paperwork. Shortly before retirement, Rex participated in an experimental military trauma response program involving highly classified neurological monitoring for combat K9s. Researchers discovered certain military dogs developed unusually intense emotional synchronization with handlers after repeated combat exposure. Stress responses, heart patterns, behavioral reactions. In some rare cases, dogs reportedly responded physically to their handler's emotional state even from a distance. Daniel stared ahead silently while the doctor continued. "After your final deployment together, Rex's evaluations became abnormal." "What does that mean?" The doctor hesitated. "It means every time you experience severe psychological distress, Rex reacted as though he experienced it too." Daniel slowly lowered his eyes, because deep down he already believed that. After retirement, the old Marine struggled badly with isolation and PTSD, sleepless nights, panic attacks, drinking, long periods where speaking to other people felt impossible. Through all of it, Rex stayed beside him constantly. Sometimes before nightmares even began, the German shepherd would already be awake watching him. Other times the dog became restless moments before Daniel's anxiety attacks started. Friends called it training. Daniel secretly suspected it was something deeper. Then Dr. Levin quietly revealed the part that changed everything. The day Rex collapsed at the veterans event, the doctor said carefully, "Hospital records show you suffered cardiac distress at almost the exact same time." Daniel froze because he remembered that moment clearly now: chest pain, dizziness, shortness of breath during the ceremony. He assumed stress caused it, but according to the doctor, Rex's heart failed only minutes later. The old veteran slowly looked through the clinic window toward the sleeping German shepherd, and suddenly the terrifying possibility entered his mind. What if Rex didn't nearly die naturally? What if the dog's body simply followed him too closely for too many years? The next morning, Daniel canceled every interview request and media appearance connected to the funeral incident. He didn't care about television stories anymore. He cared about time with the old military dog, laying quietly beside him while winter sunlight stretched softly through the clinic windows. That afternoon, a young Marine, visited unexpectedly, carrying an old deployment photograph recovered from military archives. The picture showed a much younger Daniel sitting beside Rex during their first overseas deployment. Both looked exhausted, dirty, alive in the way only soldiers surviving together understand. Across the bottom, someone had written a sentence Daniel hadn't seen in years. "If one makes it home, both do." The old veteran stared at the words for a long time without speaking, then quietly folded the photograph and placed it beside Rex's bed, because suddenly he understood something painful. The dog didn't wake up inside that cemetery because he was confused. Rex woke up because Daniel asked him not to leave yet. And after a lifetime protecting the same Marine through war, trauma, loneliness, and survival, old German Shepherd listened one more time. Winter settled quietly over Texas in the weeks following the funeral incident. News crews eventually stopped waiting outside Daniel Brooks' house. Social media moved on to newer headlines, and the world slowly lost interest in the old military dog who woke up inside his own casket. But inside the small lakeside home, where Daniel and Rex spent their final months together, life changed in ways no camera ever captured. The old German Shepherd never fully recovered physically after the collapse. Some mornings his legs barely supported him. Other days he wandered slowly through the house, like he was searching for memories hidden in the corners. Yet, no matter how weak Rex became, one habit never changed. Every single night, just before Daniel fell asleep, the dog still dragged himself beside the front door and laid there facing outward, like he was standing guard one last time. Daniel noticed it. Every night, and every night it broke his heart a little more. Because even after retirement, even after nearly being buried alive, Rex still believed his job was protecting the Marine who came home with him. One evening near Christmas, Daniel sat quietly beside the fireplace, holding the old deployment photograph that young Marine brought weeks earlier. Rex rested nearby beneath a blanket, while soft jazz played low through the living room. The old veteran looked older lately, not physically, emotionally. Like surviving the cemetery somehow forced him to confront feelings he spent years burying beneath routine and silence. He eventually looked toward Rex and spoke softly into the quiet room. "You know something, partner?" he whispered. "I think you stayed alive longer than you were supposed to." The German Shepherd slowly lifted his head. Daniel smiled sadly. "Just to make sure I'd be okay without you." The dog's tail moved once against the floor. That same night, shortly after midnight, Daniel woke suddenly to complete silence. No footsteps, no breathing near the doorway, nothing. Panic hit instantly. He rushed into the living room and found Rex laying peacefully beside the front door, exactly where he always slept. But this time, something felt different immediately. The old German Shepherd wasn't struggling anymore. His body looked relaxed, still, calm in a way Daniel hadn't seen for years. Daniel slowly knelt beside him. Rex opened his eyes weakly after feeling the Marine's hand against his fur. And for several long seconds, neither moved. The old soldier and the old dog simply looked at each other in silence while moonlight spilled softly across the wooden floor. Then Daniel quietly said the words he had never been strong enough to say before. "You can rest now." Tears rolled down his face immediately afterward, because deep down he believed Rex spent years waiting for permission to finally let go. The German Shepherd gave one slow blink, then gently rested his head against Daniel's knee, and this time, he didn't wake up again. The funeral happened 3 days later beneath clear winter skies at the same military cemetery where the impossible miracle occurred weeks earlier. But this ceremony felt different. Quieter, more honest somehow. There were no television cameras this time, no reporters, just veterans, Marines, a folded American flag, and stories shared softly between men who understood what military dogs truly mean to soldiers. When the ceremony ended, cemetery workers hesitated respectfully, before approaching the grave again. Nobody forgot what happened last time. Daniel actually laughed quietly through tears after noticing it. "It's okay," he whispered softly. He'd hate making the same entrance twice. Even some Marines nearby smiled at that. Before the casket was lowered, Daniel removed Rex's old military collar carefully and held it tightly in both hands. The leather looked worn smooth after years of deployments, storms, airports, patrols, hospitals, and nights spent sleeping beside a veteran trying to survive civilian life again. Attached to the collar was a small metal plate scratched badly with age, not military issued. Daniel added it himself years earlier. It carried only 4 simple words: "Still on duty, always." After the burial, most people slowly returned to their cars while snow began drifting lightly across the cemetery. Daniel remained behind alone beside the grave long after everyone else left. Eventually, a young Marine approached quietly before stopping several feet away. "Sir?" Daniel looked up. The Marine hesitated awkwardly. "I just wanted to say, guys like Rex are the reason a lot of us made it home." Daniel lowered his eyes briefly toward the fresh grave, then answered softly, "No." A faint smile crossed his tired face. "Dogs like Rex are the reason some of us kept living after we got home." The young Marine didn't know how to answer that, because some truths only veterans understand once enough years pass. Spring arrived slowly after that winter. Daniel started volunteering twice a week at a rehabilitation center training service dogs for wounded veterans returning from overseas deployments. At first, he resisted the idea completely. Part of him felt guilty standing beside other dogs that weren't Rex. But one afternoon, a nervous black Labrador refused to work with any trainer except Daniel. The staff joked the dog recognized another stubborn old soldier immediately, for the first time in years. Daniel laughed without forcing it. And somewhere deep inside, he imagined Rex would approve. Months later, visitors walking through the military cemetery often stopped beside one particular grave near the oak trees overlooking the lake. Fresh flowers appeared there almost every week, sometimes military challenge coins. Sometimes children left dog treats or tennis balls beside the headstone. But the thing visitors remembered most was the inscription carved beneath Rex's name: not rank, not medals, not service records, just one sentence. He never stopped coming back for his Marine. And honestly, everyone who knew their story understood that was the truest thing ever written about him. Some bonds survive war, some survive grief. And sometimes, loyalty holds on longer than life itself, just to make sure the people we love aren't left behind. If this story touched your heart, stay with us for the next journey. Because real heroes never stop standing watch.